Welcome to Trailblaze, where I introduce you to some of the innovators and game changers that you should know. Over the past 2 decades as a founder, investor, and host, I've had the privilege of meeting incredible individuals that are having a positive impact on the world. Join me as I sit with these leaders and innovators that are trailblazing their own path as they share their stories of the resilience built and the wisdom gained along the way. Enjoy the episode. Reza, thanks for doing this, man. Appreciate you joining.
Pleasure.
You've had an incredible journey from where you started life to where you are today. And I want to get into a little bit because so much of it built not just your ambition and who you are today, but it built so much resilience in you. Mm-hmm. What were the elements of your personal life journey that helped build that resilience?
Well, thanks for having me, Tony. And I would actually say that, like most things, you've got to go back to your childhood. So many of the most fundamental, foundational things of who you are happen in your childhood. And I had, if I say what the most transformational thing that happened in my childhood was I immigrated from Kenya to Canada. My family, my parents who hadn't gone to college before, didn't have much money. We end up in Canada, and 3 things happened to me. One is I'm in a new country, seeing snow for the first time. Remarkably, I skip a grade, so the Mombasa education system was better than the Toronto one. And 3, my parents, unlike most immigrants, had this strategy for my brother and I, which was cutting ourselves off from our immigrant community. Okay, so it was sort of sink or swim.
That's unusual.
It is unusual. It is unusual. And so what it did was I have this saying that we had to overcome obstacles not of our own choosing, which turns out to be an incredible privilege. Okay, it doesn't feel that way at the time, okay? But what you realize is you can actually overcome things, okay? I wouldn't have chosen necessarily those obstacles,
right.
But what those obstacles taught me was I can actually overcome a lot. And it inspired over time confidence that I could do things that others perhaps weren't able to do.
Did you know at the time that this was building a fortitude in your core that was going to lead you to be able to climb whatever mountain you wanted to climb?
I don't think I knew it at the time. I'm incredibly grateful that my parents put us through it because I think it helped build it both for my brother and me. I don't think I was wise enough at the time to know it. But what I am wise enough to know now is that when I have kids and students come to me and say, oh my God, I'm never going to make it because I had such a hard time as an immigrant, or I had such a hard time because I didn't have any money, or I don't have the relationships. What I say to them is, you got here, okay? Right. You got here. Your path to get here was way harder than the kid who was born with a silver spoon and who had all sorts of connections. So I'm betting on your slope over that kid's slope all day long. And so don't view it as a negative,
right.
View it as you learned something about yourself.
Was there a moment along the way when you decided that you were going to become a founder and that the elements of your character that had been built from your childhood was there for you to know that you could make it?
So look, I would define as my childhood, not surprisingly given the 3 dimensions I told you, as very much looking in from the outside, okay? And so what I had none of was control. So I had a desperate desire for control, okay? And I saw it as the freedom to actually have a positive impact on the people I cared about. Okay, if I could be free to have a positive impact, starting on myself, but then my family and hopefully something more broad. And what I realized was the only way to get there for me was to be a founder. And so I would say to you, in my early 20s is when I really truly embraced this notion of I want to be a founder because it's the quickest path to get me the thing I most want, which at the time was, I thought, control, power, resources. But ultimately, what it really is, all those things are just tools to have the freedom to have a positive impact.
Right, right. And in your early 20s, the obvious path for a first-generation Canadian.
It was the most disappointing call I had to make ever for my parents. So imagine this, an Indian family, me calling them saying, I'm not going to be a doctor.
Right.
Okay, this was like deathly, right? Instead, I'm going to go into this thing called business and hopefully be a founder. And so,
I mean, you have beautiful parents.
Yeah, I sure do.
You and your brother, are blessed.
Yeah, we are.
But as with me, as also an Italian,
and I know that.
Family, there is a judgment.
Yeah.
There is an expectation and then a judgment when you don't go that path.
Right.
So how did you overcome it with them?
Well, look, I think with my parents, it was the 4 of us kind of against the world, right? We moved to Canada and we didn't have this community around us, and we were kind of like, we've got to sort of move forward, okay? And so although it wasn't a conventional choice, my parents ultimately inspired confidence in ourselves, and so they supported it, okay? They absolutely supported it. I think for me, the driving star was early on, I knew I wanted control over my life. And even in being a doctor or a lawyer, I wasn't going to have control over my life that way. They're great professions. I was solving for control.
Control leading to giving you an ability to have a positive impact on the people you care about.
So what I want to be very careful on, okay, is I think initially I was transfixed by these sort of, control, power, resources, money,
power,
right? But as I get older, those things are fleeting. What you actually want is the freedom to have a positive impact on people, right? Like I think that's the fundamental desire, not just for a founder, but for most human beings. Yeah. What the founder path gives you is the learning, the credibility, and the resources to be in that position as fast as possible.
Well, and you've done it over the 15 plus years I've known you and we've been friends. You've done it way beyond what most founders do in that you have for better part of 20 years or more been teaching.
Yeah.
Teaching at the University of Toronto, now teaching at Harvard.
Yeah.
So what got you excited to go down that path? Because that is something that no one usually in the profile that we have that would do normally.
Yeah. So teaching for me has become an incredible joy. Okay. Yeah. So I actually, it's the place where I feel like I can have real impact and it gives me real purpose. But I'd say initially, like most things, you don't know that. What I was trying to do was actually solve a problem that I saw. And what you mentioned that I started in Toronto, and the reason I started in Toronto is that's the country, that's the city where we got our break and were able to emigrate to. And what I realized when I came down to Wall Street or to Silicon Valley was that the kids that went to Stanford or Harvard were no smarter than the kids that went to University of Toronto or any other school not named an Ivy League school.
And you did work in those places.
And I worked in those places and competed against those places. What they had was two incredibly important things, okay? One is they had a set of expectations that were completely different than most kids that I'd gone to McGill with. Okay, they didn't want to write a book. They wanted to win the Pulitzer Prize. They didn't want to be an engineer at Google. They wanted to create the next Google. So this set of expectations is half the battle to actually accomplishing something because the goal. And the reason they had that set of expectations was the second key difference was they had exposure to leaders who'd done it beforehand, right? And so suddenly they meet people like me and you, and they see, you know what? These guys are relatable.
Right.
Like there's not that much difference.
Right. Between me and them. Right.
There's not that much difference.
I can see a path.
I can see a path. Yeah. And guess what? This guy started kind of looking like us. He didn't start with very much, just like you, right? And you give them motivation and inspiration that it's possible. And so I think what I really, I wanted to create a path for as many students as possible to sort of view this path as something that they could actually achieve. And of course, I also believe that entrepreneurship is a force for good in the world, right? It's not just about creating a better life for the founder. That founder is going to solve a problem that a customer cares about. He or she's going to employ a huge number of people. And so it rises for everyone, frankly.
While you were teaching at University of Toronto and predating Harvard, but throughout this whole piece, you've also been active in the innovation ecosystem, creating an incubator called Next Canada.
Yes.
And that I've been involved with you along the way as well.
Yeah.
And there were two objectives there: founder development. Mm-hmm. How do we help Canadian kids in this example become better founders to solve that expectation gap, actually, in many ways that you're talking about, but also how do we build better businesses that can become global category killers?
Right.
That was a huge lift for you. Yeah. So you have your business going on, you have the teaching going on, and now you decide to make a very significant not-for-profit undertaking. Right. What was the genesis?
Well, so let me be clear. It was a huge lift, but it was because of people like you. And I'll never forget when I first pitched you this idea, I was really annoyed because you committed so fast that I didn't even have to do the work.
You now know me well.
So typical Tony, you loved it and you're in, which was awesome. Because, if you're trying to create something new, the people that matter are the ones that come in first. Right? Just like in anything, right? It's very hard to come in first. It's easy to come in when everyone else has come in.
When it's working.
So I'm very grateful to you for doing that. From my perspective, what next and what I'm focused on is far more founder development, which will result in venture success, okay? And it's both what Next Canada focuses on, it's also what my classes at Harvard do, right? It doesn't mean that they're not building ventures at the same point in time, okay? Right. But what it does mean is that I've got to light the fire in the person who has the horsepower to do it, but light the fire in them to show them it's possible and give them the resources or the skills and information to go do it, right?
And eliminate that expectation gap.
Correct, and eliminate that expectation gap. If you say to someone, if you walk into a room and you say, how many of you want to be founders? almost everyone's going to put up their hand, right? Because they're going to say, you know what, I get all these things. If it works, get money, power, freedom, all this stuff. Right. And then you say, okay, well, most of you aren't going to be founders, right? Most of you aren't going to be founders. And so the question is why? It's something you desperately want, right? At Harvard Business School or University of Toronto, they want to be founders. Right. But there's something that blocks them, okay? And after having taught now for 20 years, okay, it's pretty clear to me what blocks them. It is not ideas, okay? There are ideas everywhere. All you need to do is walk around with a pen and paper around your day and figure out what are the things that bother you. Those are ideas, okay? What'll block people from doing it is that they will never believe the idea that they have could possibly be a good idea because there are so many other people with so much more resources that should have capitalized on that idea.
Okay.
So Jeff Bezos should never have been selling books because all the bozos at Barnes & Noble, hundreds of them, were selling books, and there are hundreds of people in the strategy department at Barnes & Noble whose only job was to sell more books. So how does a guy that's maybe read a couple of books come along and say, I'm going to be the biggest bookseller in the world? Elon Musk. How many people at Ford and GM were thinking about how to sell more cars? Okay, here's this guy who builds Tesla. I mean, the point is the thing that blocks people is they assume that people with more resources, more information must have thought about it and discarded it.
But those two people didn't have any resources when they started either.
Correct.
So isn't this back to your same theme of expectations?
Absolutely. So, I have a professor at Harvard Business School who 25 years ago had this saying, which I imprint on all my students: entrepreneurship is the relentless pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. The first part is obvious.
Without regard to resources currently controlled.
It's the second part that matters, okay? You cannot be confined by the information, the money, the power you have today. If you are confined by that, you will build nothing.
You're going nowhere.
You will build nothing. And in fact, what you have to realize is that you must have an insight or something different about you that all those other people at Barnes & Noble and GM, they just missed it for whatever reason. Whether it's paralysis, whether it's inertia, whatever it is. There's something about it where you can actually act on it. And so effectively, you're not resource constrained. Okay, you can't view yourself as resource constraint, even though you have far less information, far less money, far less power.
And you don't control the resources today.
Correct.
But you have the conviction
that you will.
Exactly.
That's exactly right. And that's when, okay.
How do you get that conviction?
So can I tell you how you get that? Right. The first most important thing is you must commit. Okay, I have this phrase that magic happens when you commit. So here's the thing. None of my students at Harvard are smart enough to go build a business half-time. Others are going to crush them, but yet they think they can do that. Because here's what happens when you commit. So yes, the first piece is obvious, which is you perhaps try harder. You're like, you're going to do what it takes, all these things. But that's not the magical part. The magical part, and you've felt this, Tony. I've seen it in your career. I mean, think about at Wind and other things, okay? Right. You experience the magic when someone, an investor, a customer, an employee, sees the fear, sees the ambition, sees you almost drowning, and throws you a lifeline. Because they say, that's a kid I want to bet on. Yeah. And that's when the magic happens. And no one knows what they're capable of as a founder until they commit.
And I mean, and my big investor, who Naguib Sawiris, would say exactly that, right? Yeah. I got excited about it when I knew you were entirely, completely
So imagine trying to close him, not being committed. No chance. Right? You committed, and something magical happened. Right. He saw in you the fact that you were going to make this work.
Palpable. You can feel it on someone.
You totally can feel it. Yeah. It's like when I invest in a founder, you can feel it. I mean, you do it all day long, right? So I think to your question, the first step is commitment. Okay, the first step is commitment. The second thing I would say is that at the end of the day, what differentiates a founder is judgment. Let's back solve it. How is it possible that so many founders at such a young age can do things they've never done before? Okay, like let's take Michelle Zatlyn at Cloudflare. Yeah. Michelle had never managed anyone prior to creating Cloudflare. Right.
Didn't have the background.
Right. She now launches Cloudflare. 2 years later, she's managing 100 people. 5 years later, she's managing 1,000 people. So you'd say to yourself, well, every textbook says in management is a learned skill that takes a lot of time, et cetera, et cetera. What founders get is the benefit of what I call exponential learning. Okay, and I define learning very clearly. I define learning as making consequential decisions that you are accountable for. The reason they're consequential is because they matter to you. It can be as simple as signing an office lease, whatever it may be. But the reason they're decisions is because they're clouded in uncertainty. They're not clear. So you're counting on your judgment. Well, guess what? Judgment is just like any other muscle. the more you exert it, the better you get at it. And so what founders have the benefit of is testing their judgment repeatedly.
Yeah, all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Because every decision they're making is with scarce resources. Right? They've raised a little money. They got to decide whether to hire this person or that person. They got to decide whether they get a fancy office or less fancy office. Those are all decisions that really go to your judgment.
And they're accountable for it. Immediately accountable for it.
It's
not a big organization.
It's not an advisory.
Right.
If you're working at a consulting firm, an investment bank, at the core, you're not making decisions. You're just advising someone else to make decisions, right?
Yeah.
That's
you don't
a big
pay for
difference.
it when it's wrong.
So I think commitment and being a focal point on increasing your judgment, like making those decisions and realizing you're going to get some of those wrong, but you're going to learn from it. Those are two of, in my learning, the most important things.
Right, so you had those things. You were a founder from, as you say, in your 20s. You had the difficult conversation with your parents.
Yeah.
You broke free from the mold. You did it.
Yeah.
You didn't have, like any of us, including myself, none of us had a straight line to great success.
Correct.
Most difficult moment and how you overcame it.
Being a founder is fraught with crisis. Right? Meaning it is just fraught with crisis. You know this. I mean, you've gone through so many. It's like that Monty Python skit where you keep losing your limbs and you're like, I'm still alive,
I still
right?
have an arm.
I'm still alive, okay? So that's exactly it. So I would say I've had the good fortune of building a few businesses, and every business there has been a crisis, okay? But here's the thing about a crisis, and what I learned is, this phrase of don't waste a crisis, because you learn so much from it. You learn about who are really there at your side, who's going to bail, who's made of the stuff that you want.
Especially in an existential one.
Right, that's exactly right. Who you're going to go to war with. They actually serve a real purpose, even though at the time they feel terrible, right? And so, I've certainly had my share of crises. Perhaps the most damaging one was probably the one where I've had a good run, but there was one business where I had to make a very difficult decision, and it felt like a real failure. Okay, so we had a asset management business in 2007. I reverse engineered my partners based on skill set. Big mistake. Okay, you gotta engineer your co-founders based on values and objectives, right?
Alignment.
And I did this very much on skill set and do they fit the bucket? Let's make the perfect thing. And of course, what happened was when the financial crisis hit, we didn't have the stability from a founding team perspective to make it work. And so I made a proactive decision to return the capital and effectively fold the firm up, okay? It was an incredibly difficult decision for me because it was the first time as a founder where I'd made a decision that didn't feel successful. But what I didn't realize at the time was in my next business that I built, my two largest investors from that business invested in this business. And I'll never forget what one of them said was, Reza, I always knew you could make money, but now I know you can do the right thing. Because the reason I did that was because I was protecting their capital. And so I didn't have the foresight necessarily to think that this was going to end up being helpful to my next business.
So you knew it was the right thing
But I knew it was the right thing to do. And as a founder, when you do the right thing, it may not always feel great, but it'll always end up accruing to your benefit.
I mean, look, you've met a lot of founders. I have too. How many return capital when it's not working?
Right. It's a hard thing to do.
That's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do.
You felt like that was a failure for you.
Yeah.
You now, in hindsight, know that, in fact, it built great relationships. It built amazing relationships.
It did. Yeah.
What would you say to people, though, that are facing that, call it impossible moment, need to make the difficult decision, know they need to make the difficult decision at their own peril?
Yeah.
How do you help people see beyond the other side of it and that life goes on?
So let's take an extreme example, because I think this is another thing founders can fall into, which is take exactly what you said and now move it into the gray zone. Okay, meaning as a founder, there are tempting ways to cut corners, right? There's tempting ways, and you've got so few resources, you got intense pressure.
Yeah. And you can rationalize
a lot. And you can rationalize a lot of it. You can rationalize a lot of it. And so what I like to say is the only thing of value you have as a founder at the end of the day is your reputation. Because just like that moment when Naguib invested in you, it's because he looked in you and he said, I see something. I see something good. I see something powerful, right? If he was concerned about noise around any reputational issues, there's no chance he would have invested in you. Zero chance, right? Zero. So, I have a phrase as a founder, which is if you're involved, you're responsible. So as one of the things you don't get to do as a founder is to say, oh, this wasn't my fault. I didn't, it wasn't someone else did this, right? So I think it's just much easier as a founder to just realize that if you're involved, you're responsible. So if you see it, you're responsible for it. Yeah. And at the end of the day, you got to act. It's actually a rational decision to do the right thing, right? Because doing the wrong thing, there's like, okay, yeah, you may make a little bit of money or something like that, but just think of the downside to your life of, that
money you can recover, reputation you cannot.
And so I think it's
one
just,
and done on reputation. Yeah. You cannot recover.
And we see so many founders who make this choice, this bad choice, and it's not only is it morally wrong, but it's actually, if they just thought about it from a probability return perspective and included reputation in there and all the things that gives to you, it would never make that decision.
Do it.
You would never make that decision. And I think, and I'm just also saying these points of crisis and difficult decision making, as a founder, I know nothing's going straight up and to the right. There's always going to be bumps in the road. Yeah. And so as a founder, you've got to want to be the guy or the gal that's making the call in those situations, right? Yeah. Like you got to realize no decision is a decision. So many people in the face of that crisis just are paralyzed. Yeah. Right? They're just paralyzed because they think, okay, I'll wait. I'll get more information. Yeah. Well, just remember that's a decision. Yeah. And that decision may be as or more painful than acting on it.
Yeah. It's amazing how people take time out of the equation and just say, well, I can just sit still. No, you're not
costly.
sitting still.
Time is really costly.
Yeah, you're not sitting still.
Time is really costly. Yeah. It's like when you've got an employee that's not contributing. Human nature, I mean, I feel it. Human nature is to give that person more time, right? Yeah, they've got a family. It is always the wrong thing to do, right? Because what you don't realize is the impact that person has on the rest of the team's culture, which is they're saying, oh, well, the founder's willing to accept this.
Yes. Right.
It's always better to terminate that person, however hard it is, in order to save the business for everyone else.
Absolutely.
But this
especially
is exactly
in the early going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
When you're at
well, then you've got very few chips.
Right.
Right. Yeah, so it's these difficult decisions that, if you think about it as a founder, that ultimately will make or break the company.
Reza, we're here in Muskoka. You and I are both keen on longevity. I guess maybe I think
you're a little more keen than I am. But
the world needs more of us. I think that's what we want to live for.
Right. I like to say we're a group of narcissists that think the world would be much worse if we died anytime soon.
You've had an incredible longevity journey yourself. Okay, so you've obviously built businesses. You had multiple exits. You've been a CEO. You've been a chairman. You've raised capital. Teacher, Harvard, U of T. Founded an incubator, done all sorts of charity work. I'm involved in some of your charity work all over the place. You are a busy person. Mm-hmm. Family as well, right? Like kids as well. Yeah. And when I first started talking about longevity, you looked very different than you look today. Your energy level was different. Yeah. Your posture was different. What was the moment that made you want to switch gears, and how has the longevity journey been for you? Yeah. What's been easy and what's been difficult?
Yeah. I saw success as having a healthy, happy family, making money, having an impact on others. My health was not even on the radar screen. Right. Okay. It was so far below all these other things, right? To the extent I was worried about existential things, it was, okay, what kind of an impact am I going to have on people?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Legacy.
Legacy. Yeah. Okay. And so, I think what happened was I started interacting with people like you who seem to have all those things, but also were keeping themselves really healthy, therefore being able to do those things for presumably a lot longer than I might, okay? Right. And what I also realized that it was no different than many of the other things I was doing in my life. Meaning when I build a business, you have a vision and you go execute on that plan, right? When you build a charity, you have a vision, you go execute on it. And you guys had, I met people like you who said, I'm gonna live to 120. Or more.
I remember the first time I said that to you, the way you looked at me.
Yeah, I was just in shock.
You guys even more crazy than I remember.
I was like, I might take 75 to 80. I'll trade that, okay? And suddenly there's a guy who I respect and love who thinks that they can do this. And so I think that, there were a few people in my life who were clearly people I respected and who found time to maintain their health and optimize it. Not only found time, but seemed to get a lot of energy from it, okay? And I think that was the light bulb moment for me, was that this wasn't a negative to all the things that I was trying to do. This wasn't going to take time away. This was something which was actually going to give me even more power.
Right, add time.
Add time, Okay. It was like in my brain, in my little brain, I was like, oh, an hour working out is an hour not working or an hour not building something.
Right.
When in fact, an hour working out or an hour doing meditation or whatever it is was going to make the other set of hours far more powerful.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think there was sort of a mental realization, okay, that occurred and really inspired by, I think, people I respected who were on this journey. Okay. For me, I think that once I realized this was important to me, there were a few things that I needed to do on this journey to make it work for me. One was I have to have data in order to make good health decisions. So just like running a business, you want data, so what I realized was suddenly you can get data. So I started with this glucose monitoring system, which to me, because I've got a very bad family history of cardio issues and diabetes issues, it was fascinating to real time to be able to see what would happen when I had a latte from Starbucks.
So this is a real-time glucose monitor.
Yeah, either the Dexcom or the Libra.
Yeah, app connected, and you're seeing
right
your glucose as you ingest food,
right.
as you ingest liquids, your glucose level changes.
Correct. So as an example, I would be rushing through an airport and I'd be like, okay, I'm going to be healthy and I'm going to have a whole wheat Subway sandwich, okay, because that's healthy. Right. Now, I would have fooled myself with that forever until I got this monitor. And I'm looking at it. I'm having this so-called whole wheat Subway sandwich.
Healthy sandwich.
Healthy, so-called, right? And my glucose level is going through the roof.
Disastrous
literally,
for you.
I'm going to blow up.
Right.
I'm literally going to blow. I feel like I'm going to blow. Like, I don't feel that way, but I'm looking at the machine, which is telling me, my body's telling me, you are an idiot. Okay, you are a complete idiot. Yeah. And guess what? I'll never have that sandwich again.
Right.
You could have told me not to have that sandwich, and I probably would have had that sandwich. Yeah. But seeing it real time and knowing that's connected to my bloodstream and I can see what it does.
Got it. Transformational.
It's transformation. Yeah. And these things are so great. I mean, even things like if I have a coffee with milk and without milk, it makes a big difference. Right? So it really, for me, as someone who likes data, that sort of customized data has a real impact on me. And so, on the Oura Ring, all these wearable devices, I think, for people like me, they're a game changer because suddenly you can't just pretend that it doesn't really affect you, these choices. You're actually seeing it.
So for you, it's been bringing devices into your life that are showing you really how the impact of real-time decisions.
Yeah, correct.
And giving you all of that data around those real-time decisions.
Yes.
And then it becomes relatively easy for you to make a choice that's better for you.
Correct. Because then, or said another way, and it's a flip of what you just said, is I won't make stupid choices. Right. I'm still working on making the best choices, but what I don't do anymore is make stupid choices, right? Like I know having a piece of white bread is idiotic for me. I know having a lot of pasta is crazy for me. And again, it may not be crazy for everyone, but it's crazy for me because I am predisposed to have glucose spikes with those things. And I know the exact foods that are going to give me. So I'd say that if I would say the most important things, one, surround yourself with people who are knowledgeable about this topic and who care about you. I had the good fortune of having a group of people like you who knew a lot and kind of held me to account. Right, I know every time that I'm seeing you, I'm like gonna be like,
there's Jesus, gonna be some sort of judgment.
There'll be some sort of judgment. So I gotta have my game on. Yeah. And then secondly, for me, the data, the wearable technology changed the game for me. It really changed the game for me. Awesome. So I think those are the two things. And I think initially I was very focused on things like weight, alcohol intake. Right. H1AC, sort of glucose levels.
The table stakes things that we all hear about.
Right, correct. Yeah. But again, through interactions with people like, I call them my psychotic friends like you and others who are focused on, third level health stuff. I'm starting to think much harder around sleep, meditation, things like that.
How have you thought about incorporating all of this now into the rest of your life and to everybody you touch?
Yeah. First of all, it's a massive priority in my life. Yeah. Okay, so if I'm going to a hotel, my assistant is making sure there's a gym in that hotel. She's faxing me. She's emailing me the menu beforehand. Like I'm thinking hard about what does that look like? What does my next 24 hours look like? She'll give me a bag of nuts to go on a plane. So none of this used to happen. Right. Okay, so these are things that are now part of my life that are important. Tomorrow I've got to fly out for a meeting. I've pushed off the meeting so that I can meet my trainer tomorrow morning. Okay. I would never have made that decision beforehand, right? Yeah. So for me, it's just become more of a priority. And likewise for my wife and kids, I hope they, I know with my wife, this has sort of become something she's really got involved in as well. So I think it's, and the way I justify it, Tony, is I've actually found that I can, to the extent that I'm in a phase of my life where I'm really trying to have impact, I think I can have more impact if I'm living a healthier lifestyle.
I mean, I agree with you completely on that. I think of it as production and production capacity.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, your production is going to be so much better in every aspect of your life if you have more capacity to do it.
Yeah.
And so it's, when we think about, we all run businesses. Yes. We think about a factory. We think about your house, your home. We do maintenance on it. We think about your car.
Yes,
we do maintenance on your car. We don't expect your car to keep running without maintenance.
Yeah, right.
We don't expect our house to keep working. We don't expect our business
Why would we expect our body to?
Why would we expect our body to just be okay?
The other thing, and this is the next phase for me, and I look to you for inspiration on this, is the whole mental piece. Like the whole sort of spirituality, mental piece, how you think, positivity. I said this to you this morning. When you walked into the room, I was like, the whole place felt more positive. Okay. And there's an aura about it. Right. So I think that's a real gift in terms of longevity as well. Right. If you're focused more on the positives that are going on in your life, right. And you bring out the best in others, it's a gift. And so I think for me, that's a place that I'm trying to transition to, because, I would say that a lot of my life was around sort of paranoia and risk mitigation and all that sort of stuff.
Well, those are the things, and ironically, those are the things in many ways that give us the necessary strengths and skills to be doing the things that we're doing, right? And it's so interesting how it becomes a detractor.
That's right. It can be confusing. Yeah, it can be confusing. So I think that's exactly right. So I think for me, the way I'm going to sort of square the circle is, I think that having that ability actually, for me, is helpful. Like at this stage in my life, being able to transcend some of the negatives and being able to put myself in a spot where there's joy will sort of feed on itself.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Trailblaze. Would love to hear from you. Tweet me or comment on LinkedIn or Instagram and share what you took away from this episode. This show was produced by Creator Club Studios. You can start creating today at creatorclubstudios.com.